No? Now try it. There we go. Hi, how is everybody doing tonight? So I want to preface this whole night with my giftedness is definitely, for those who know me, in talking. I talk a lot. But my giftedness is not in talking in front of people, it's talking with people. So I'm always uncomfortable when I'm up here. I'm always like, it's different. It's a completely different thing. I love to have conversations with people. I can do it for hours, and you can feel really uncomfortable. But I'm going to do my best tonight because I am excited about opening tonight for Skip and for Freedom Builders, and who I have a heart for myself. So, but my first 10 minutes of what I have planned out is exactly what Brian said. So he lost 10 minutes of my sermon there as well. But I am super excited. Just another announcement to preface what he said is that we will be in Right Brain Brewery next week. We're super, super excited about that. We'd love it if you invite people. And hopefully we'll get back to Sunday mornings and get back to what, I mean, it's been a long road for us. We've been on this journey for, a year and a half now. So, and we're going to hear the wind my whole time. So, but we have been on this journey for a year and a half, and we're super excited to finally see it culminate back into where we feel God is leading us. So, all right. So if you have a Bible or a device, unfortunately I do not have, I'm slacking this week as well, so I do not have the words up on the screen this week for you. But if you have a Bible or device, open up to John 9. And we're going to cover tonight a pretty famous miracle in the Bible where Jesus heals a blind man. And so if you want to open your Bibles to that, we'll get after it. All right, so John 9, verse 1. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the task assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. Then he spit on the ground and made mud with his saliva and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. This makes me want to take a mud bath. It sounds fantastic. So he told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said no, he just looks like him. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I am the same one. They asked, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. So we're going to stop there, and then it continues on. If you keep reading, we're going to kind of jump around a little bit, but the rest of it is, nobody would believe this man that he was the blind man, right? And and if we look at Scripture, this is actually the first time in Scripture, Old Testament, knew that anybody was actually healed from blindness. So nobody was really believing that this is what was happening. And so then it goes on, and they take him to the Pharisees, and they take him to the synagogue, and they're questioning him. Who is this man? What's going on? And then he just keeps repeating his story, and then nobody will believe him to the point that they have to prove that it's him. So they have to get his parents. So his parents come in, and the parents say, it's him. This is our son. He's an adult. Let him speak for himself because we don't want to get in the middle of this mess. And then they ask him again, and then he's sick and tired of telling his story at this point, and he says, no, I once was blind, but now I can see. And then which a very, very famous song came from that. And then it just continues on and on to the point that they kicked him out because they didn't want to believe that this man had been healed by someone else, and they must have been a sinner who had done it. So I looked at this story and I was studying it, and to be honest with you, I had a really tough time this week because I had all this information, and I'm trying to study and figure out what I wanted to speak on. And you guys ever have that day where you're trying to think of a word and you're in a conversation and the word just can't come to you. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, you wake up and you're like, that's the word. I got to send a text message. And then you send that text message and the person texts you the next morning and goes, don't ever text me at 3 o'clock in the morning again. Okay? So I'm that guy. I don't care. My phone's on silent at night, so I always text people at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm the guy who gets that text back saying, don't ever do that again. So I think the moral of that story is put your phone on silent, your alarm still sounds. So, but, especially if you're friends with me. I'm on my way here tonight, and I was sitting on this off and on all week, and the week before, and I'm compiling stuff, and then today I'm trying to put it together, and I cannot figure out what I'm missing. I knew I was missing something, and I'm driving here today, and I'm with my daughter, and I'm driving, and she's trying to talk to me, and I'm like, honey, I am so trying to focus on what I've got to speak about tonight, and I am scatterbrained, and I have no idea what I'm going to focus on, and this word pops in my head tonight. I'm driving here, so if this whole thing doesn't work, it's because I completely changed most of what I was talking about on my way here. But the word that popped into my head tonight was perspective. Jesus changed his perspective. And I think that's what the theme we're going to see throughout this. So we're going to jump back to the beginning here, where Jesus heals a blind man. So we go back to verse 1. It says, Jesus was walking along. He saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? And I think it's important to understand Jewish culture in the day, because why would they ask that question? I mean, he was born blind. And today, we don't look at somebody and say because they were born with a birth defect that all of a sudden there's something wrong with them. Their family must have sinned. It's not the way our brains work. We go, oh, there's bad things happen. People are born with defects all the time, unfortunately. Right? But that's a norm for us. Jewish culture, when they would look at somebody who was born, they had this cause and effect idea of sin. So all sin had to be a cause of something else. And because of that, because of Levitical law and the way it was, they would, and God had it, he would come and say, no, you must have done something to cause this, and here's the rituals and the traditions that are required by law to pay for that. Okay? So anytime we look at sin, and they looked at this sin, they saw this blind man, and automatically somebody had to do something wrong. Okay? So it was either the parents or himself who had done something, because they also believed that you could sin in the womb. So, which is a whole other thing. We see that a lot in the Old Testament. If you look at Job, and the whole book of Job is a lot of, and I know if you guys don't know the story of Job, Job basically is, God allowed him to be persecuted and everything taken away from him, right? So he's got boils, and all of his children die, and all of his flocks are gone, and everything's been taken away from him. And if you read the book of Job, there's a bunch of chapters right in a row where Job keeps going to his friends. And his friends keep telling him, you must have done something wrong. Oh, you didn't do something wrong? Your kids must have done something wrong. You need to do this. You need to do this. So this is the mentality of the Jewish culture. So when they see this blind man, their first thought is somebody did something wrong. Now Jesus' response is really interesting, because Jesus says he doesn't do anything. Jesus says he didn't do anything. His parents didn't do anything. This man was born blind. Let's read it word for word. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. See, the disciples, they looked at this man, and they make the man's suffering the object of discussion rather than an opportunity for compassion. They obviously knew, if you read that, it's not like they knew this man was blind from birth. It didn't say they saw that he was blind. They knew he was blind from birth. So obviously they knew who he was. He had been around. They had been around him. They knew who he was and that he was blind from birth. And not once has anybody shown compassion to him, but they use it as an object for discussion instead of an opportunity for compassion. And Jesus has to correct this. So, Jesus responds, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the task assigned to us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. So obviously, God allowed this man to suffer so he could be used. Okay? Why would God allow a man to be born blind? Which in this day and age, and we also see later on, because we read that they called his parents in, he doesn't live with his parents. He lives alone. He's probably a beggar. He's living on the street. He can't see anything around him. The world is not made at that time to help people in those type of defects. People in that time had a tendency just to be outcasts, and they were ostracized from society. God allowed this. And I think that's really where the root of what these disciples are asking is, why would God allow suffering to happen? Okay? And Jesus just answers it real simply with, so I can use it for my glory. And that can be really uncomfortable for us, that sometimes God allows suffering in our lives just so he can use it. And if we look at this, and we look at the response, so then Jesus, again, because if we go back to last week, Brian's sermon last week talked about compassion. He had healing. He healed somebody because he had compassion for somebody in his gut. Okay? And so if we go the last 2 weeks, he talked about go, and last week we talked about compassion. And this week we're going to kind of have a mixture of both. You're going to see Christ spits in the dirt. And I don't know about you guys, when I get nervous, my mouth gets dry. So my mouth is drier than I'll get out right now. I could not spit enough right now to make any mud to cover half an eyeball, let alone both eyes. It's got to take a lot of saliva in order to spit in the ground, to mix it together, all right, in order to put it on somebody's eyes. And Jesus spits in the ground. He makes the mud. And once again, in most of his miracles, he reaches out and he touches the man. He puts mud on both of his eyes. He tells him to go wash himself, and the man can see. Jesus had compassion, and he used that. He used that for his glory. If you read a little bit further on, just a little quick side note here, the man says, he's being questioned again for the second time. He said, I don't know whether he is a sinner. He asked if Jesus was a sinner. He said, I don't know whether or not he is a sinner, the man replied, but I know this. I was blind, and now I can see. And we've all heard that before, have we not? It's probably in one of the most famous Christian songs of all time in Amazing Grace. So God not only used this to teach the disciples a lesson and us a lesson, but it was used in a song that has affected more people, a Christian song, probably than any other song in human history. Because God rubbed spit, mud, on a man's eyes, and he believed. Little side note. I want to make sure I got that in there. But this begs the question. It's really easy to see this when we're reading the scripture and we look at it and say, cool, this guy was healed. Jesus used it. He taught his disciples something. We learned something. But if God allows sin for a man in the Bible, if he allowed him to be blind and he did nothing, does that mean that we suffer the same strictly for the glory of God? And I 100% believe that's true. I use this line that I work with addicts a lot. And we always use this line that sin always has consequences, and sin is never a victimless act. Okay? We always, in addiction, and working with men in addiction, we always use that for ourselves, because we're always trying to find healing for ourselves. So the sin that I create always has consequences. So something that I do has a consequence, and it will always have a consequence, no matter if I do it in private, if I do it in public, or it's a big group thing, it doesn't matter. Sin that I do that's contrary to God's good and perfect will have a consequence. And that sin will directly hurt somebody else. So I'm married and I have 4 kids, and I can tell you that I have sinned more times than I would like to even imagine, let alone admit to. And it has directly affected my wife, and she did nothing. Now, there's definitely the opportunity for my wife to sin in response. But my wife can be directly affected, and my children can be directly affected by my sin. I caused suffering in my family for my sin. Now I just got to allow that, right? I'm sorry I'm jumping around a little bit here, but like I said, I came in and perspective changed. So, I think that God allows us to suffer. And He wants us to suffer for the glory of Him for a few reasons. One, suffering equips us. Okay? So, I lived for myself for a long time in life, and I did things that were 100% had nothing to do for the good of anybody else, but for the good of myself. And I believe that was suffering because it made other people suffer. I suffered because of it. I almost lost my house. I almost lost my wife. I almost lost my kids. And I believe that God allowed me to suffer in that to equip me to love other people. God allowed me to suffer to feel compassion for other people, to empathize with other people, to set me up in life so that I could use that suffering and the suffering that I caused for others in order to empathize with them and then help them find freedom in Christ, the same freedom that I had found. Suffering strengthens us. If you go to the gym, most people, no pain, no gain, right? See Richard back there. You're a gym guy. I'm not. I have not hit the gym since I left the Air Force like 7 years ago. Okay? And even then in the Air Force, I didn't like the gym then. All right? So, but if what they say, no pain, no gain. In order to build muscle, you have to break it. You're causing tiny miniature tears, right? In order for us to grow in our faith and in our walk, I believe that sometimes there has to be suffering in order to break us, to build us stronger, to know that there's hope on the other side, to know that I'm not alone, to create relationship with other people, to know that God is in control and I'm not. Suffering strengthens us. I also believe that suffering corrects us. I believe that when we suffer, easiest example is my children. When my kids do something wrong, there's generally some suffering in response. I don't have to spank my kids anymore because I spanked them when they were little. But anyway, that's besides the point. Don't anybody call the police or CPS. I don't beat my kids. But there is suffering in that. When they do something wrong, there is a consequence. And part of that consequence knows, hey, you know what? When I do this, it hurts. Right? Why don't I do a little bit of construction, just enough. I do a lot of things just enough to be dangerous. I like to put it that way. Like, I know construction just enough to be dangerous. But, I don't hit myself in the thumb with a hammer on purpose. You know why? Because it hurts. And it's stupid. And I like my thumbs. We have opposable thumbs. It's kind of cool, right? So, why don't I do that? Because suffering, the first time I did it, I realized it didn't work. It didn't feel good. Don't do it again. It corrects us. Suffering, that's a simple example. But really, suffering corrects us. We realize through pain and through hardship and through trauma that sometimes things, I don't want to do this. And I think Jesus allows that to happen. God allows those things to happen to strengthen us, to correct us, and then equip us. So, for example, my children. I can now tell my children, hey, when you use that hammer, don't hit yourself in the thumb. God equipped me by my own suffering to teach my children that running a thumb through a table saw is not a good idea. All right? I have friends who are missing half of their fingers because they ran them through table saws. I don't have to run my fingers through a table saw and suffer to learn that that's a bad idea. Right? Jesus allows bad things to happen to equip us, to strengthen us, and correct us. And when that happens, when we see those things, our perspective changes. If you look at this man, can you imagine for a second? I mean, if you just closed your eyes, I don't know if anybody's done this. Have you ever closed your eyes and tried to walk through your house? It's probably the most familiar place you've ever been. Or there's no lights on, there's no full moon, there's no stars, and you're trying to walk through your house in the middle of the night, and you're like, man, this is kind of hard, right? Imagine living your whole life this way. Your entire life, somebody rubs mucus, mud, clay, crap on your eyes, tells you to go take a bath because you probably stink. It washes off, and you can see the world. Imagine the perspective change that this man had. Perspective is everything. I had a perspective change, and I don't want to make this about politics because it's not. This whole sermon is really about changing our perspective on suffering and compassion. But recently in my own life, we've definitely had a lot of changes in the world lately, haven't we? 2020 sucks. Maybe we can just admit that. 2020 sucks. And I was going to preface this. We're going to be here September 13th next week. But it's 2020, so who knows? Who knows? We're hoping and praying we're going to be there next week, 10 a.m. Who knows? We at Restoration are all about transparency. And one of my goals in life has been to allow God to change me every moment of every day. I want to have an open heart and an open mind to have a change of perspective that is Holy Spirit focused and changed. And when I was preparing this message, I'm like, I want it to cut me first. And I'm thinking, like, going back up to my other point was, they make the man suffering the object of discussion rather than the opportunity for compassion. And I'm sitting there going, when was the last time I saw something happen and I wanted to talk about it, or I wanted to justify it, I wanted to have a conversation about it, instead of having this deep, compassionate change in my heart. And the civil rights movement in the United States has been huge this year. And this is not politics. Don't hear me say it, because we are a Jesus church, and I love Jesus, and I believe that we are a Jesus following church. And I want to be that way in my life. So when George Floyd was killed, I was watching it on the news, and it exploded. And my first initial thought, and this is me as transparent as I can be with you, and we can argue this or have a debate or a conversation afterwards. My first initial thought was, man, I wonder what he did wrong. I wonder, he must have been resisting arrest. He must have been high. He must have been something. Because police don't act that way. I'm a veteran. I have family members that are police officers. And that's where my heart was at. Because the people I know and people I served with are great people. But my first initial reaction was not the compassion for the loss of a life that God created. And that hurt. And don't hear me say that the reasons for actions in life and the circumstances that happen in the world, they matter. Reasons matter. But my first initial thought was not compassion for the loss of a life. My first initial thought was justification for something else. And when that hit me, and I sat back, and I thought about it, and I talked to Brian about it, but also the compassion, and then all of a sudden it brewed hate and everything else, and it just exploded. But what about the compassion? And this is going to cause probably some emails. Make sure you send them to Brian. I'll send you his email later. About the compassion for the police officers. Because I know in addiction, I work with men, and myself included, who didn't. Paul says, why do I do what I don't want to do, and why do I do what I don't want to do and don't do what I want to do? We spend our lives doing things that we don't want to do based off of our backgrounds and our history and the things that have happened to us and traumas. And I look at those as reasons because they require responsibility. But like, I can look at an addict and I don't feel angry when they hurt somebody. I feel sad. I feel compassion Because I understand what it takes for a human being's brain to get to a point that they have no control over themselves. And I have compassion for that because I can empathize with that. And instead of feeling angry, I want to do something. So Jesus was perfect. And Jesus, every time he saw somebody hurting, he instantly had compassion. And he made it personal because he touched them. Over and over and over in his miracles, he came up to them and he used it to glorify his Father, but he also touched them. He made it personal. He came in relationship with them. He had compassion, the first thing he did. And if we're to emulate Christ, I think we're asking the wrong questions. We shouldn't be trying to justify things. We shouldn't try to be looking at things and try to find a reason. We should be literally living in the grace and mercy and the love of Christ from the cross. And we should be showing compassion in every circumstance first. Every circumstance first. And if we show compassion, it changes the way in which we act. That was a huge thing for me, that I had to go back and I had to ask forgiveness for Christ of my mentality and the way I looked at that and the way I thought about it. But it changed me. And when I look at people now, for the police officers, for the victims, and everything that's ensued on top of that, I have compassion. I apologize, it's raining, so either run underneath. It's going to be really loud. So I'm going to move it along really quick, I promise. It's going to get really loud, and I want Skip to talk because he's a much better speaker than I am. So after all of this happened in this man's life, he can now see he's been questioned by the Pharisees like he's on a legal counsel, right? And they want to know all of these things. I believe that Jesus used this miracle in his life. So I need to pause for a second. Jesus used this miracle in this man's life to soften his heart, to be able to take him home. So, and what I mean by that is, if you read into this further, and if you take the time and read all of John 9, it's beautiful. Where he's questioned over and over and over again. But he gets to a point where he's thrown out by the Pharisees, and they say, just go, you're trying to teach us, you're speaking too much logic, you're speaking too much reason, you need to leave. And Jesus comes and finds him. And this is what Jesus says. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? The man answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. You have seen him, Jesus said, and he is speaking to you. Yes, Lord, I believe, the man said, and he worshipped Jesus. Then Jesus told him, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind. I see this man, Jesus came back to him after he had healed him, and he performed this miracle in his life. And if you think about it, this man has never seen Jesus before. So Jesus rubbed mucus on him, rubbed it on his eyeballs, told him to go wash, and then Jesus left. So this man has never seen Jesus, so he doesn't even know who he's talking to at this point. And he asked him, who is he, sir? I want to believe him. You have seen him, Jesus said, and he is speaking to you. Yes, Lord, I believe, the man said, and he worshipped Jesus. He changed his perspective on life. And without the miracle, the question is, would he have been so open to Jesus? Without the compassion of Christ, would he have been willing to worship Jesus in that moment when the time came? I think that God, And we're going to talk about freedom builders here. I'm going to let Skip come up here in a minute. But I see what Freedom Builders does and what other organizations and ministries that we partner with are doing. And they show compassion to people. And when they show compassion, they're showing hope of Jesus. Without that small act of compassion and hope to soften somebody's heart to understanding that there's something greater than the circumstance that they're currently living in, like being blind, I don't know if some people would come to Christ. But God's got a will for each of our lives. Jesus says that, back there in verse 4, verse 5. Jesus has a plan for our life, and it's our job to step into it. So my hope for you this week, I want you to go back and I want you to read all of John 9. And I want you to start thinking about the things in your life that you're not showing compassion for. The things in your life that, the suffering in your life that you're not forgiving yourself for. Because suffering is made to grow you. And if you're going to look at your suffering and not have compassion for yourself, you're not going to be able to have compassion for others. So my question is, are you willing to embrace the suffering in your life for Christ and allow it to drive you to God? And once you do that, are you willing to embrace others' suffering to drive them to God? The response, once we realize what Christ has done for us, is to do that for others. So, it's raining. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Skip up. As Brian so eloquently put, I am on the board for Freedom Builders as well. And this is Nate, his trusty sidekick who we love to death. Freedom Builders is somebody we want to partner with because this is beautiful. I'm going to yell a little bit for you because they are an organization that shows compassion. And they show compassion to show Jesus and to share Jesus with people. So let's share some more.
I'm beginning to wonder if maybe God doesn't want me to talk tonight. I can't even hear myself. I think I've changed my message about 3 times during the course of the talk tonight. I knew what I want, much like Clayton, I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and then it changed several times. But I think on the theme of this idea of suffering, we've got something to build on. To put it in perspective so that you folks know, and maybe you guys understand better than I did, this ministry has been in action for about 20 years. This August, actually was 20, this August 1st. We've served over 3,000 families in the 20 years that we've served. There are 27,000 families in the 5-county area that live at or below poverty. And they live in some deplorable situations. Things that you would not imagine exist today. There are homes without any floors that people are living with dirt floors. There's people without any plumbing that's worked for 5 years. We served an 87-year-old lady a couple years ago that lived without heat for over 5 years. She only called us because her plumbing froze up and she couldn't flush her toilet anymore. The reality is that there are 27,000 families living without hope. We can stand back and we can say that they're doing bad things or dumb things or they got themselves in the situation they were in. The reality is, much like Clayton was saying, if we don't go and have compassion, they have no hope. People don't give up because they're lazy. They give up because they don't believe tomorrow can be any better than today. And to put it quite bluntly, today sucked. The reality is you can Join us in being the hands and feet of Jesus. We say over and over again, we don't care about fixing houses. We care about loving people so well they want to know the one who loves them most. We'd ask you to join us in that. We tell you that if you don't have any construction experience, you're amazingly equipped to work with us. We don't need people with construction experience. I have 2 guys that I work with every day that are phenomenal at equipping those with the least amount of skills to do some of the most amazing amount of work. And when volunteers show up to serve somebody, trust me, those families we're serving, they know how deplorable their condition looks. And when you serve them with joy, you will watch a life change in a radical way. Sometimes you'll get to see that happen just in that day that you're there. But we've seen it again and again where we did one project a few years ago. Were you on Ed and Nancy? I don't think you were on Ed and Nancy's job. Literally this home, they moved up here from Flint, got a home that nobody had lived in for 15 years. The community had used it as a household waste dump. Literally, we hauled out 40 cubic yards of household waste before we could even start. Before we were through, we gutted this trailer to a 14 by 70 tube and recreated a home. We had a brand new plumbing, brand new heating, brand new roof, brand new windows, and we actually replaced 60 feet of the exterior wall. But the day we started, all we did was we had 37 people haul 40 yards of garbage out of the house and put it in a dumpster. We all left, and I realized I'd left without saying goodbye to Ed and Nancy. When I went back, I walked back into the house, and Ed was standing in the middle of this 14 by 70 tube, turning around in circles, looking up at the ceiling. And I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "This is pretty amazing." And I said, "Yeah, we gutted it all out, and it's pretty empty, but we'll recreate it, and it'll be a beautiful place before we're through." And he said, "No, that's not what I'm talking about." Whoa. What Ed said was, in a very quiet, gentle voice, 37 people came who didn't know me. I never met them ever. They worked in a terrible place, and they never once complained. He began to weep when he said, they actually cared about me. I don't know that Ed had experienced really genuine love and compassion ever in his life. Over the period of time of serving Ed, we got to know his story, and I will tell you, it's not a pretty one. But he was an amazing man. I used to say Ed was not one of the pretty people. My wife corrected me. She said, "Ask Ed about his wife, Nancy. And when you do, look at his eyes." You know what? Ed was pretty beautiful. He loved Nancy. He cared for her. She had one leg. She had had from diabetes and a number of other issues. She was in terrible health. But Ed loved that woman well. And all we did is equip him to do that. But in doing that, Ed found out somebody loved him. And he began to understand there was a God who, in spite of all that he'd done wrong in his life, still cared deeply for him. Guys, I'm not sure how that necessarily fits. I'm going to tell you that we'd invite you to join us. There isn't anybody who's not equipped to serve with us. And that's not out of making you feel guilty. I will tell you, I don't know if I can read this. My wife did a, shoot, I'm shaking. My wife did a talk one time. Whoa, boy, don't do that. And my wife hated doing talks. Way worse than Clayton. Thank you. And I'm gonna read this because my wife's not with me anymore. I lost her 19 months ago. This ministry scared the snot out of her. I thought it was because of money, and I was wrong. These are Janet's words. I told you earlier that God called my husband and I to begin a ministry that scared me to death. I'd like you to know how God has honored the little step of faith and what he did in spite of me. He's allowed us to be part of serving over 3,000 families. He's demonstrated his faithfulness that when we had no way to pay our house payment, he made a way. He's allowed us to be part of giving hope to some people that had no hope. He has taught us what poverty and hopelessness in our own community is. He has shown us that a mom in Traverse City can be as hopeless as a mom in Africa. And he has allowed me, this messed up person, to be his hands and feet. And it just doesn't get better than that. I'll finish with the last of it in just a second, but to set it up, we served a lady, a family of 5. Lucinda was the kind of head of household, and all the rest were family members, but Lucinda was completely wheelchair bound with rheumatoid arthritis, but she was the caregiver. The others were all developmentally disabled. And I'm sorry. And they had a whole lot of problems with their home. But Janet loved Lucinda well. So I'll finish with this. I told you that the Lord has blessed me through this ministry. He's called us to. But the truth is that I didn't want to take the first step. I don't know if that's you or not. It really began for me with Lucinda. You see, Lucinda lives in poverty. She's fully wheelchair bound and is a caregiver for 4 developmentally disabled adult family members. I was scared to death. Scared of not knowing what to say or not knowing how to help. And most of all, I was scared to care about her for fear of having my heart broken. I took a step of faith. I did not allow my fear to steal my opportunity to see the Lord work both in and through me. And now I can tell you my friend Lucinda has become one of the greatest blessings in my life. She amazes me, she inspires me, and most of all, she loves me. And then Jane asks who's the one being served. And then she closes with this. I would pray that you are blessed enough to be stretched and asked to go where you're scared to go, that you can see the Lord work in and through you. Can't think of a better thing to close with. Come join us if it scares the dickens out of you. If you're worried that you don't have all the right answers, then that's probably right where you ought to be. Apparently I'm supposed to get off. All right.
Thank you, Skip. Yeah, we're going to wrap up now with the rain. We have some projects coming up. We can talk to Skip and Clayton about those projects that we're going to be having. If you have any other questions about restoration, what we're going to be doing with Freedom Builders, the way that we're set up, any of that kind of stuff, we would love to talk to you more, but we're not going to hold you hostage. So thank you guys so much for coming out. We love that you're here, and we will see you at the brewery at 10 a.m., which would be a really bad sentence to say any other day of the week, but Sunday morning we're going to do it at 10 a.m. and we're going to have a church service. We're going to love Jesus there, and we're going to have a great time doing it. So thank you guys so much for coming out. We love you, and let's chat.